Fredericton West Hanwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the reality is this government has told us very clearly that they're going to seize seniors' life savings, and that's a concern. And it took quite a while to get any kind of transparency out of this government. In fact, this week took 12 questions to get a figure, a number, from the Minister of Finance on how much this ad scam is costing New Brunswickers. And I still doubt the accuracy of that figure. But we'll keep this simple for the government. Now, yesterday, the Premier actually took time in question period to read quotes rather than answering the questions that he was presented with, which is his duty. So I'm going to refer this to the Minister of Government Services. I want the Minister to tell us who was awarded the contract for these ads, and what was the fair, open, and transparent process to make sure this $30,000 was allocated in a fair, transparent way.
The Honourable Premier.
Monsieur le Président, j'invite le député de l'opposition d'aller voir le record de hier. Moi, j'ai répondu aux questions, Monsieur le Président. Ils n'ont simplement pas aimé les réponses. Monsieur le Président, j'ai répondu lorsque le député de l'opposition a demandé des questions sur ce sujet hier. Moi, j'ai répondu que le député n'avait aucun problème à mettre sa face sur des annonces, Monsieur le Président, pour prendre des crédits pour des investissements dans la route de Hanwell. So he had no problem, Mr. Speaker, putting his face on some pamphlets trying to take credit for the Hanwell Road construction, Mr. Speaker. Yet when we put an ad out with no politician attached to this ad, we only put facts and figures out, Mr. Speaker, to explain a policy in which the opposition has been fear-mongering about. They criticize us. This is the member opposite that was in a government where the former Premier Allward had an ad where he was the ad. He was the one talking the whole time. So, Mr. Speaker, we have no lessons to learn from the member opposite on this.
Member for Fredericton West Hanwell.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm quite proud of the investments that our government made in the Hanwell Road, and I'm glad to say that we put that money in the budget. But I would suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, that this Premier and this government does have a lot of lessons that they could learn from me and from this opposition. In fact, the Premier will be interested to hear that I did, in fact, clear my ad with a legislative officer. In fact, I personally discussed the matter with the Chief Electoral Officer of the province and the Supervisor of Political Financing. These are things that this Premier told us a year ago that he would do.
Order.
So I'm wondering if he has done it. Has he taken the time to consult the Supervisor of Political Financing on his ad? And if he hasn't done it, will he do it again today?
That's right.
The Honourable Premier.
So, Mr. Speaker, again, I answered the question yesterday. Again, the member opposite clearly didn't like the answer, but that's the way we have to roll here on the floor of the legislature. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to take issue with what he said in his preamble. He's very happy about the construction of Hanwell Road. I thought the opposition was against infrastructure spending, Mr. Speaker. I thought they didn't like our infrastructure plan. I thought they said that we shouldn't be doing that. I'm very confused, and I really hope that they're going to clarify for New Brunswickers if they support infrastructure investment or they don't. So, Mr. Speaker, do they support the fact that we have invested in the Sainte-Naval? Do they support the fact that we've invested in the St. John Barge Terminal? Or maybe the Miramichi Centennial Bridge, Mr. Speaker? Do they support the fact we invested in the schools in Riverview, in Woodstock? Mr. Speaker, they also take time to encourage us to invest in the bridge in Cherryville, the Moncton Metro Centre, the Justice Building in Sussex, Mr. Speaker, and now they're taking credit for investments in infrastructure in Hanwell. Well, which one is it? Do they support infrastructure investments or not?
Member for Fredericton West Hanwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, this Premier loves to present false dichotomies, which is what he's doing here. I'll tell you, I'll clarify it for this Premier. I'll make it crystal clear for him. We support prudent, measured investments in infrastructure. What we don't support is $150 million a year shoved into procurements and infrastructure investments that we don't need. We don't support a $150 million slush fund that is not required. We do not support doubling the annual deficit, all measures this government is quite keen to embrace. So, Mr. Speaker, another thing we don't support is unprocured government procurements of $30,000 to advertising. So I would like to ask this Premier, since his own minister won't answer, the Procurement Act states clearly anything beyond $10,000 must be competed. Where was the fair, transparent, open process that awarded this $30,000 contract for advertising?
The Honourable Premier.
Monsieur le Président, lorsque ça vient aux annonces, nous l'avons mis très clair que nous allons toujours informer les gens du Nouveau-Brunswick. Nous n'allons pas avoir des annonces qui sont partisanes. Monsieur le Président, et c'est exactement ça que nous avons fait, et c'est exactement ça que nous allons continuer à faire. C'est aucunement ça que le gouvernement précédent a fait, Monsieur le Président. And again, on infrastructure, the member opposite gets up and says that they support I forget the words he used, Mr. Speaker, responsible investments in infrastructure. So I would like him to point out the projects in which we have invested in that they do not support. Which projects do they think were not strategic, Mr. Speaker? Was it investing in schools in Miramichi? Was it investing in the Centre Naval, Mr. Speaker, in Caracat? Was it investing in the St. John Barge Terminal? Was it investing in the schools in Riverview and Woodstock? Which projects specifically do they think were not good investments? And why is it, Mr. Speaker, that all the investments they think are good happen to be in Tory ridings, Mr. Speaker?